For those who are curious about organic, but maybe a little skeptical, that first question they ask is usually about weeds. How do you keep your fields looking good if you're certified organic? So we answer that in another module. Now the second question they're gonna ask, what do you do about pests and diseases? And that's a really good question, which we're gonna cover right here in this module. Let's start out by asking another question, one that you're probably thinking about right now. What broad spectrum materials are out there to control all of those pests and diseases that you might encounter on an organic crop farm? As much as I'd love to just hand you the book that says, here are all the silver bullets in organics, the ones that you can just go buy on the store shelf and fix all your problems, that's just not how we do it. At the risk of sounding a little bit like a broken record, just like every other aspect of organic production, from weed control to fertility, there are no silver bullets, no sledgehammers to drive your problems away. Instead, what farmers have are lots of little strategies, smaller hammers. When used together though, they can be adequate while being ecologically sound, regulatorily compliant, and profitable. A quick note here. I'm talking about insect pests and diseases in the same sentence. I know that they are definitely not the same thing, but we use a lot of the same hammers to ultimately address them. For our purposes, we're going to be painting in such broad strokes that we can, for the most part, cover all of our bases by grouping them together. Many of the same organic strategies work to control both equally. Actual organic control decisions will of course be more specific and require a bit more research. All right, we're gonna dive into the cultural and material controls in just a second, but let's take a minute to hear some of the language that the National Organic Standards Board wrote to define organic production. It says, organic agriculture is an ecological production management system that promotes and enhances biodiversity, biological cycles, and soil biological activities. It's based on minimal use of off-farm inputs and on management practices that restore, maintain, and enhance ecological harmony. Sorry, that just gives me chills. This language clearly calls out the ecological nature of organic production and explains how effective pest management depends heavily on the health of the ecosystem. And that's where we'll start. We'll first look at the ecological components of pest and disease control, then cover pest identification and control resources, talk cultural conditions, and finally end up with a discussion on the allowed inputs. When it comes to pests and diseases, I like to think about a farm as more than just crops and nature. You want to think about it as an agroecosystem, a living, breathing, multifaceted organism that contains all of these different parts of nature, including your biodiversity as well as your crops. A farm is an agroecosystem that includes the field borders, natural vegetation, nearby forests, ditches, windbreaks, gullies, and grasslands. It also includes the deer that walk through the grass waterway, or the skunks that sprayed your dog last week, and the raccoons that stalked that sweet corn in your garden. It's an ecosystem that also happens to include the pests and diseases that can be found in and out of your crop fields. I'm taking the time to paint this larger picture because to understand organic pest management, we need to first see pest and disease population as integral, inescapable parts of the agroecosystem. And to have any hopes of controlling them, you'll need to work with and adapt that agroecosystem to find a natural balance between each part, the crops that you want to sell and the insects hungry for your crops. Recall the last sentence in the NOSB definition. A focus on management practices that restore, maintain, and enhance ecological harmony. That, my friends, is the basis of all organic pest and disease control. Up to now, I've been throwing around this word control, but an even more accurate way to describe pest management in organics is management. Our goal is not to control and really wipe out pests or diseases, but instead, we want to keep them at tolerable levels, minimizing their cost and maximizing our crop health. All right, so let's just bring this down to earth here and put it all into one sentence. Effective pest and disease control on an organic farm will require a functioning, diverse agroecosystem capable of regulating unwanted diseases, pests, and pathogens. The system best regulates those undesirables, not something that you're just going to spray. As an example, a diverse agroecosystem that includes buffers, woodlands, maybe even some prairie strips, will also be home to a host of beneficial organisms like insects and birds that will ultimately be key to keeping pest pressure in check. An organic corn farmer wants plenty of predatory stink bugs around to help combat your army and earworms, or you want some damsel bugs to help combat your aphids. Now, if you thought pesticides had some badass names, let's check out some of these names of predatory insects. Assassin bug, ambush bug, soldier beetle, and pirate bugs. Well, come to think of it, those are also the names of some insecticides. But the bugs are going to be a lot less expensive, and you don't need any PPE to put them on. But don't just take my word for it. Let's hear about how ecosystem diversity affects pest populations from an expert.
So my name is Ryan Schmid, and I work at Igdices Foundation, and it's a nonprofit research foundation located here in rural South Dakota, and I'm one of the research scientists here. Maybe a context to frame some of this in is a quote that's kind of contributed to John Muir, where he says, when one tugs on a single thing in nature, he finds it attached to the rest of the world. And that's very true for what we're talking about with increasing diversity and some of the management decisions in our fields. There are consequences, both good and bad, for all of those decisions that we're doing in our fields and pastures and whatever we're managing. You know, the term pest is kind of a farce anyway. If everything's working right, there should just be a community of insects. And we only have a pest when their populations explode and they're a problem for us, but they shouldn't be a problem. And so if they are, you need to think back, what is the habitat or the mechanism that I created out there or was created? Maybe it's not your fault. Maybe you inherited something, but how can I mitigate or alter that habitat to control that?
I then shared with Brian that many of the producers that I've worked with don't experience pronounced pest pressure. And he agreed with me, and this was his answer as to why that might be.
The reason they're not experiencing the same level of pest populations is because, one, your organic guys are reducing a lot of their broad spectrum sprays. So they're pesticides. Because let's face it, those pesticides, a lot of them are knocking back beneficial insects like lady beetles, carabid beetles, syrphid flies. All those beneficials are getting hurt by those pesticides. Even if they're not directly killing them, there's things called sublethal effects, which they hurt them enough that it slows them down, where they either get preyed upon by something else, because a slow insect is a dead insect, usually, or they just can't find their food fast enough. So the organic people don't have that hurting it. So they're creating a better community because they're just giving them a better home. And then also organic producers, I find that they're a little more into diversity. And that goes back to giving them a good home to live in. So you're attracting a lot of your beneficial insects. And it's creating a good, complex community where you have redundant predators, both from the top down and then the bottom up. Having that greater level of diversity in their fields also slows down pests from coming in, because pests got to find these fields too. So there's all kinds of weird mechanisms out there that an organic producer is benefiting from. It's pretty broad to say just increase diversity. That's all you got to do. A practical thing, and a lot of folks kind of know about this, maybe don't know the term, but it came from Britain. They're called beetle banks. If you've ever heard of those, they're really well researched, and I don't think they've transitioned to America. Some people call them conservation strips in their fields, where they pretty much put in some kind of more perennial, diverse mixture, a strip in their field. And they found beetle banks. They're significant for overwintering densities of predatory carabids, which are ground beetles, as well as Staphylidae beetles, which are rove beetles, some people call them. They're the skinny, long-bodied beetles that run around on the ground. And they're great predators for things inside of your soil. And to go back, it goes up and down in this ecosystem too, meaning we go to higher trophic levels, and the provisioning of more insects in there. They found the beetle banks contribute to useful habitat for diets of birds. So they're increasing their bird species. So you see how like this one decision to maybe you got aphids or you got wireworms in your field, whatever it is you're trying to get rid of, by increasing the diversity of one thing, it's really connected. It's a whole system that you're influencing out there. And this is just a snippet of what we've been able to find. There's so many other connections that we haven't even thought to look for yet.
I then asked Ryan about some of his graduate research, and he shared one study that he did in which he, while looking through a microscope, was actually doing microscopic surgery on the guts of bugs. And this is him telling you about that.
We see that increased plant community diversity increases the microbial diversity inside the guts of our insects. And that microbial diversity actually helps them to digest weed seeds and digest their other foods differently. And they pick that up from their environment and what they're eating on. So if we destroy that microbial diversity, we're not just hurting microbes that could feed our plants, we're hurting microbes that could also help our insects consume weed seeds for us. That's like just one weird linkage that you'd never think of. And I'm sure there's a million other ones out there.
Dang, nature's kind of amazing. Now that we have an understanding about the ecology of organic pest and disease management, we'll dive into some practical strategies in the next lesson. All right, see you over there.